Bashar al-Assad, the iron-fisted ruler of Syria, a figure who has become synonymous with both resilience and brutality. He has clung to power through a devastating decade of civil war, a conflict that has redrawn the map of the Middle East and left an indelible scar on the Syrian people. Assad has presided over a humanitarian catastrophe of unimaginable proportions, marked by widespread displacement, suffering, and loss. On the other side of this complex equation stands Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. Putin is determined to restore Russia's global influence on the world stage, seeking to reclaim its position as a major power broker. He is also driven by a deep-seated desire to resist what he perceives as Western-led regime change operations, viewing them as a threat to Russia's own stability and sovereignty. The alliance between Putin and Assad is not rooted in shared values or ideological alignment. Instead, it is a pragmatic partnership built on mutual survival and the pursuit of geopolitical leverage in a turbulent region. When Assad's regime teetered precariously on the brink of collapse, threatened by rebel forces and facing mounting international pressure, Putin intervened decisively, making a bold move that would reshape the course of the Syrian conflict. He began deploying Russian air power in support of Assad's forces, turning the tide of battle. He also provided Assad with a steady stream of advanced weapons, bolstering his military capabilities, and he offered diplomatic cover, shielding Assad from international condemnation and sanctions. This strategic move inextricably tied Assad's fate to Putin's own reputation and credibility on the world stage. Syria became a showcase for Russian power projection, a demonstration of Moscow's ability to influence events far beyond its borders. For Putin, propping up Assad was a high-stakes gamble, a calculated risk with potentially significant rewards. It was a demonstration that Moscow could succeed in stabilizing a volatile region where the West had arguably failed. The survival of Assad, against all odds, became a potent symbol. It symbolized Russia's reliability as a steadfast ally, willing to stand by its partners even in the face of intense pressure. And it underscored Russia's resurgence as a global power broker, capable of shaping events and influencing the course of international affairs. In this high-stakes bet on the future of Syria, Putin wagered not only Russia's prestige, but also its long-term strategic interests in the Middle East. All of this hinged on the endurance of Assad's regime, a regime that continues to defy expectations. Russia's intervention in Syria, beginning in 2015, marked a significant turning point in the country's brutal civil war. It was about more than simply saving a dictator, Bashar al-Assad, from imminent collapse. While that was certainly a factor, the motivations ran much deeper. At its core, it was about securing its only Mediterranean naval base at Tartus. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, it was a strategic imperative. Tartus represented a vital outpost for projecting power into the Mediterranean, a region of immense geopolitical importance. It allowed Russia to maintain a constant naval presence. Putin's unwavering support for Assad sent a clear message to the world, and particularly to other authoritarian regimes. Moscow would not tolerate another Western-backed regime change like the one that had toppled Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. The message was clear. Russia protects its allies. Beyond these strategic and political considerations, the Syrian war became a valuable testing ground. It provided a real-world environment for evaluating Russian weapons and military tactics in modern warfare. This, in turn, boosted arms sales to other nations and enhanced Russia's overall military prestige on the global stage. At home, the intervention was carefully spun by state media as a resounding triumph for Russian military might and strategic thinking. This narrative served to distract the Russian population from persistent economic woes and further bolster Putin's image as a strong and decisive leader. By making itself indispensable to the Assad regime in Syria, Russia effectively inserted itself into the heart of Middle Eastern politics. Russia forced global powers, including the United States and European nations, to engage with Moscow on Middle Eastern affairs, giving them a seat at the table. This solidified Russia's position as a key player in the complex and volatile landscape of Middle Eastern affairs. Syria, therefore, was more than just a country to be saved. It was a crucial chess piece in a much larger game of geopolitical strategy. It was a calculated move, one that significantly expanded Russian influence in the region and directly challenged the established Western-dominated world order. For a time, this high-stakes gamble appeared to pay off handsomely for the Kremlin. It succeeded in cementing Russia's role as a key regional player, a force to be reckoned with in the Middle East and beyond. The stakes in Syria are incredibly high, and the potential ramifications of a shift in power are far-reaching. If Assad falls, it's not just a Syrian defeat. It represents a significant blow to Russia's geopolitical ambitions and standing in the world. It's a personal humiliation for Putin, a direct challenge to his authority and strategic vision. He invested military might, vast amounts of resources, and significant political capital to keep Assad in power, effectively turning Syria into a crucial testing ground for Russian military capabilities and foreign policy strategies. In doing so, he was making Syria a symbol of Russian strength, a demonstration of Moscow's ability to project power and influence in the Middle East and beyond. Assad's collapse would shatter this carefully constructed image, undermining the narrative of Russian invincibility and strategic prowess. It would expose the limits of Russian power, revealing the vulnerabilities and constraints of its military and political interventions. Furthermore, it would highlight the fragility of its security guarantees, raising serious questions about Moscow's ability to protect its allies and uphold its commitments. The world would witness a public unraveling of Putin's grand strategy, a highly visible failure that would be dissected and analyzed by leaders and policymakers across the globe. The images of toppled statues and fleeing allies would be broadcast globally, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of aligning with a seemingly weakening power. The loss would inevitably be linked to Russia's overreach in Ukraine, highlighting the strategic miscalculations and resource constraints that have plagued its foreign policy. This would be seen as a direct consequence of resources being drained from Syria to the Ukrainian front, weakening Russia's position in both regions. Other Russian allies would inevitably question Moscow's reliability, reassessing their own relationships and strategic alignments, in light of Russia's apparent inability to secure its interests. If Putin can't save Assad, a longtime ally who has relied heavily on Russian support, who can he protect? This question would resonate deeply within Russia's sphere of influence. Russia's model of trading security for loyalty, a cornerstone of its foreign policy, would be fundamentally undermined, eroding trust and confidence in its partnerships. This would send shockwaves through its global alliances, potentially leading to a realignment of power and influence on the international stage. Ultimately, the humiliation would be Putin's, a personal and political defeat that would tarnish his legacy and weaken his grip on power. But the consequences would ripple far beyond Syria, impacting global geopolitics and reshaping the international order in profound ways. Assad's fall would deal a direct blow to Russia's war effort in Ukraine. It would embolden Ukraine and its allies, proving that Russian power is stretched thin and vulnerable. Putin would face a dilemma: divert resources from Ukraine to salvage Syria, or abandon his Middle Eastern project. Either choice weakens Russia. Redeploying troops risks Ukrainian gains, while retreating from Syria signals global decline. A new Syrian government would likely expel Russian forces, erasing Moscow's strategic foothold in the Mediterranean. NATO could then focus more on containing Russia in Eastern Europe, strengthening Ukraine's position. The narrative would shift from stalemate to Russian decline, galvanizing Western support for Kiev. In this way, the fate of Damascus could reshape the battlefield in Ukraine. Syria and Ukraine are not separate wars, they're two fronts in Putin's quest to redefine Russia's global role. Syria was meant to showcase Russian power abroad. Ukraine is about consolidating it at home. The wars became intertwined as resources and elite units shifted from Syria to Ukraine, leaving both fronts exposed. The Wagner Group, once key in Syria, was gutted by the demands of the Ukrainian conflict. Every Ukrainian victory now weakens Russia's position in Syria, and vice versa. The fall of Assad would prove that Putin's invasion of Ukraine undermined his Middle Eastern achievements. What began as symbols of strength could become monuments to overreach. The two fronts are now inseparable in their impact on Russia's future. Assad's collapse would trigger global scrutiny of Russia's next move. For the West, it would validate the strategy of pressuring Moscow and encourage greater support for Ukraine. China would reassess its partnership with Russia, wary of being tied to a faltering ally. Regional powers like Turkey and Iran would rush to fill the Syrian vacuum, risking new conflicts and realignments. The fragile order Russia imposed would vanish, plunging the Middle East into uncertainty. Putin, cornered, might escalate his rhetoric or turn inward to shore up his authority at home. The myth of Putin's strategic genius would be shattered, with unpredictable consequences for Russian politics. The world would watch for signs of instability within the Kremlin as the costs of imperial ambition mount. The fall of Assad would mark the start of a new era, not just for Syria, but for the global order. Syria could fragment into competing spheres of influence, deepening the humanitarian crisis. Russia's influence in the Middle East would collapse, forcing it into a junior partnership with China and greater isolation. The dream of a multipolar world with Moscow as a key player would fade. For Ukraine and the West, a Russian defeat in Syria would strengthen calls for a decisive victory in Ukraine. The psychological blow to Russia could hasten the end of the war on terms favorable to Kyiv. Assad's fall would be a lesson in the dangers of imperial overreach and the interconnectedness of global conflicts. The world map would not just be redrawn, it would be reimagined.